Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Campbell, and I'm really happy to be here today at home with D&Q in my house in honor of my brand new book, Rave, which is out in stores today. So I think the way that this will work, the PR team, Kaya and Julia, very graciously sent me some questions that I can kind of go through to talk to y'all. And then as you come up with questions, please feel free to send them in the chat or send them to D&Q and they'll forward them to me. So I'll just start by talking about my book, Rave, and what inspired me to do it. The book kind of loosely, I won't give you the entire plot, but I'll summarize it a little bit. It follows a character named Lauren who is kind of contending with being raised in a really conservative evangelical church environment and then also going to public school. She develops a relationship with another girl in her class and has this conflict of faith and sexuality. And that's roughly what the book is about. This is a book, a lot of people ask me if it's autobiographical, and certainly there are many elements of it that come from my own background. Actually, I think I'll start by reading the quote at the beginning of the book, just a short quote. This is from Pat Robertson. Feminism is a socialist, anti-family political movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. So if ever there was an advertisement for feminism, there it is, right there at the beginning of the book. Pat Robertson, renowned televangelist. Many people may be aware of him. He's said some pretty heinous things over the years. His mentor was another kind of, I don't know if he was a televangelist, but another evangelist named Harold Bredesen, he wasn't the founder of the church that I was raised in, but he was really instrumental in kind of structuring it and setting the tone. So just to give you a sense of like how I grew up, Pat Robertson is probably a pretty good vibe. So I did have kind of like Lauren, the character, this experience of going to this really conservative evangelical church and then being in public school and feeling all of these conflicts in my life. And I've wanted to talk about this for a long time. The church was really the dominant thing in the first 18 years of my life. I'm like 36 now, so the first half of my life. And it's been something that I've wanted to address in my work in comics or in my studio art also work as an artist, visual artist for a long time, and it's been kind of struggling with it. And in fact, one of my earliest comics that I made, and I'll maybe get into how I started making comics in a little bit, but one of the earliest comics, or maybe the first comic I ever made, was this. Hold this up to the screen. It's called Rave, number one, issue one, the one and only issue of what was going to be a longer series. And I published this for Chuck Forsman's micro publisher, Oily Comics. Here's the first page of it. You can kind of see. So it's not the exact same story as the book Rave, but this was kind of like my first foray into trying to address this upbringing and, kind of, again, that's like what Linda Berry calls autobifictionalography, or a friend of mine, Rebecca Rosen, who's another great cartoonist, just told me that the French now have a term for it, autofiction, which is a little more sleek, maybe. So I tried making this comic in 2013 or something like that. 2013. There's another page here that's similar to one of the pages from Rave, the book. But I wasn't really ready at that point to write a full graphic novel. It was sort of, I just got kind of overwhelmed by the idea. I wasn't happy with the drawings, or didn't have it totally planned out. And so it took me another couple of years of learning, another, I guess, decade of learning and experimenting and making shorter work to get to the point that I could really address the story in a way that I wanted to. Maybe I'll start by talking about how I got into comics. So I was always interested in visual art. I grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, and was going to church and going to school, and I really liked drawing, and I always knew that I wanted to be an artist, like from a super young age. And then as a teenager, I got a job working in a bookstore, really great bookstore in Victoria called Monroe's Books. It was founded by Alice Monroe and her husband, Jim. The husband at the time, they then divorced. And I loved reading. And while working there, I discovered graphic novels. The bookstore sold Mouse by Art Spiegelman and I Never Liked You by Chester Brown. It's a Red Sandman, and it like sort of blew my mind, this idea that there was a medium that combined visual art and text, like all the things that I loved all together in one medium. So that was super exciting for me. Started getting really into reading comics, and then I moved to Montreal to go to Concordia for my undergraduate degree in painting and drawing. While I was living there, some friends of mine were like, we went dumpster diving and we found a bunch of comics proofs in the garbage from Drawn and Quarterly. You should go work for Drawn and Quarterly. And I was familiar with them, but I didn't know that they were in Montreal, or I hadn't thought about it. Kind of hilarious that it was like through dumpster diving that I decided to apply for an internship. And I ended up getting an internship and then worked there for a number of years, which was like unbelievable comics education. I feel like it really helped me hone my tastes and my knowledge about the current state of the medium, the history of the medium. I met like many of my best friends through working there. I'm married to a cartoonist now. I met through being at a convention for D&Q. So it was like this incredible comics education working there. But simultaneously, I was like interested in making comics, but a little bit too intimidated, working with cartoonists like Linda Berry or Julie Doucet or all these other, these cartoonists that I admired so much and that were kind of at the top of their field. I was like, the idea that I would draw something that they might one day look at was like humiliating or like just too scary for me. So it wasn't until I was about to leave the company and Chuck Forsman, I'd been making all of these jokes on Facebook I was really into writing jokes for Facebook at the time. And I have some of them printed in this little book here. I'll read a couple to give you an example of the kind of things I was writing. Like, let's start calling solid food what it is, a mayonnaise delivery vehicle, or my secret grilled cheese recipe. Instead of butter, I use spray tan, or is this a piece of banana or a worm? Should that change how I eat it, etc.? Maybe you get the vibe. I can read more if I go through my spiel too quickly. Anyways, making these jokes, and Chuck Forsman from who did The End of the Fucking World and a number of other really great books. He was doing this micro press and asked me to write a zine for him, and he said, you don't even have to do drawings. I could get someone else to illustrate it if you want to. And I was like, no, I can do drawings for an 8-page zine. I can totally do that. And it was kind of through doing that that I started making comics a little bit. Moved to Chicago to go to grad school, and then in painting and drawing. And I felt really like exposed making paintings in my little beehive studio. People would come in and say, like, why are you making this painting? What's that brushstroke all about? And all of a sudden comics became this like release valve, because I could secretly draw them in a sketchbook, and no one would see them, or if they did, they were like, we have no idea how to talk about this. One of my faculty members said once in a critique for someone else's work, I don't know how to read comics and I refuse to learn. So that was like kind of the tenor of not the whole program, but a big part of it. So that was also exciting for me that I could draw comics and do that on the side. There's a question here about, that turned into a couple of books for Koyama that then led to ultimately making Rave. There's a question here about my workday patterns. What do I like to do? I think I'm in a somewhat unique position because I work as a cartoonist, but I also make other kinds of art, like maybe it's like 50, like half and half of the time. So I brought some samples here. Make a lot of art out of carpet. So it like here, these are not completed pieces, but this is like an example of things that might go together into some much larger work. Or for instance, I recently opened an exhibition at the Kohler Art Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where I reupholstered a lazy boy with car wash mitt material. If you're in Wisconsin sometime in the next year, please go. It's free. You can sit in the chair if you want to. It's very comfortable. So I'm kind of like doing both of these things at the same time, or not at the same time. When I'm working in one track, like right now, I've been making fibers work. I kind of am exclusively in that track. Same thing when I was working on Rave, I was like pretty much exclusively working on the book. So I'd get up in the morning and have coffee, walk the dog, and then sit down at this little desk. I sent D&Q some pictures of my workstation that maybe they'll post today on their Instagram. I don't know. So I'd sit down at a little desk and draw. This was also during COVID lockdown that I was working on this book. So a lot of my jobs got canceled. I was teaching a little bit remotely, but my entire life basically revolved around this desk for a year, 2 years. So I got really into like the squirrels, also naming the squirrels. I named all of the squirrels. I got little squirrel furniture for them. I spent a lot of time watching them out the window. We would like, I don't know, had this intimate kind of relationship until ultimately they started nesting in part of the porch and kind of rotted some of it away. And Aaron, my partner, had to dismantle it, and it was that kind of chilled our relationship a little bit. But that was my life, working on this book, just sitting for hours and hours and hours at this desk. I like to watch TV while I'm working, so I had my laptop playing like forensic crime TV or whatever. I like really bad like John Travolta action movies and stuff, basically like just stupid stupid television. I've tried in the past to learn as I'm working, but I find that impossible. So that was what this process was like. At some point, my hip started hurting me. I went to the doctor and got x-rays, and then she was like, I can't see what's wrong. And I said, well, I do sit on this wooden chair for like 14 hours a day every day. And she said, yeah, that's why you're having body problems. Um, so that was what this process was like. And then I have a studio as well that's in my garage where I work on the big kind of fiber stuff, but it's uninsulated. It has no windows. So whenever I'm able to kind of take something more portable elsewhere and work on it, that's my preference, definitely. Oh yeah, there was a question about how I created the book. When I started making comics, I think like from working at D&Q, I listened to a lot of cartoonists talk about their process, and some of the people I admire the most, like Linda Berry and Chris Ware, they don't thumbnail their work. They have an idea and they kind of sit down and put pen to paper, and it's like they're geniuses and they're at the top of their field, and it's so great. And I thought I'm going to work that way. And then eventually I kind of realized that I should maybe think about thumbnailing or doing some kind of draft because the work wasn't turning out. I needed another layer of editing. And so I went straight from thumbnails into the final comics for a long time. But I felt like my last book, the pacing was too quick. It was kind of off. And I talked to a couple of my friends, Nick Dranasso, about his book, Sabrina. That was really, oh yeah. I mean, I was happy about the last book. Peggy's getting mad at me that I'm critiquing my own work, but I wanted to kind of slow down the pace a little bit. And I talked to Nick Dranasso about his great book, Sabrina. And I talked to Anya Davidson, another great cartoonist, about her book, Lovers in the Garden. And both of them used a written script for those books. And then thumbnailing, and then moved into the final comic. And so I decided to try that. I'd been nervous about using a script because I felt like you can have the tendency to like put in too many words and, not think visually in planning out the book. But I felt like I had enough experience at that point that I would be able to manage it, and also that I could benefit from another layer of editing. So that really helped me a lot. I felt like I was able to get the dialogue down the way I wanted it to, and the pacing, things could be a little bit slower. The nature of this book is maybe a little bit more slow and contemplative. So that really did help quite a bit. And then I moved into thumbnails, brought some props here. I found some thumbnails. I like working in these lined notebooks, and I like working with pen and drawing really small so that I'm not tempted to make the drawing perfect. I can really think about it just as a kind of blueprint or a drafting tool. Here's another page of thumbnails. For some reason, I don't know why I do this, but I have like a million different sketchbooks, and like 4 pages of the book will be in this sketchbook, and then 4 pages will be in another one, which is like frustrating afterwards, but it worked out okay in this case. Got some other questions here. So the other thing, oh yeah, I brought some more props to show people. So I also have some, the design for the book. I was thinking about a couple of things when I designed the cover. I wanted to look at rave flyers from the 90s. So there's like some smiley faces in the eyes and neon colors and like this kind of rave pattern. There's also like a crucifix or cross shape. It's hard to tell on the screen here, but there's a white cross shape where the text fits into. So there's a little bit of a religious illusion there. But I was also looking at, this is like my favorite book design ever. It's called Canadian Art Today. It's from 1972 or something like that. So I feel like I'm always trying to steal the design from this book. This is an art book that my grandmother owned and I inherited from her. So it's kind of a mixture of all of these different things. And then the actual book, I feel like I see my partner is a cartoonist too, a really great cartoonist named Aaron Renier. And he makes these, when he's drawing his book covers, he makes these beautiful drawings and they're huge, they're amazing. Um, I did most of my design on the computer, but here's like how I drew the shapes on the cover. Used an old Sharpie, you can kind of tell. So the texture is kind of, it's not totally flat, which you can see if you look on the cover, you can kind of see that there's like this grainy texture. And I drew it in a lined notebook for some reason. Probably would have been better without the lines, but here's the sketches for the cover here. And then most of it I laid out in InDesign. So my preferred design tool. Also, I should say, if anyone has questions, feel free to send them to D&Q through whatever vehicle you're watching this on, and I will gladly answer them. I don't have slides, so questions are super helpful. So that's the cover design, kind of where that came from. And then I guess the other thing, I've got some of my originals here. So oh yeah, so you can kind of see the originals. They're drawn, this is like 11 by 14. Oh yeah, here's one. So they're drawn kind of large, kind of ish compared to the small final size of the book. That's another trick that I learned from cartoonists. I used to draw things at 100% or its size, and I'm like, oh, but it looks much better if you shrink it down. So hot tip for any of you cartoonists out there. And then I don't know otherwise. I haven't gotten any questions here. Tracy says, shout out to InDesign. Back when I started at Drawn and Quarterly, we were using Quark, which was like a really annoying tool. So I am a fan of InDesign, grateful for it. I don't know what else. I mean, about the book, I sent some posts over to D&Q to post today, so there's like more details about some of the specifics in the book. There's a lot of scenes in it. Like here's a scene, she's kind of talking on the phone. This is meant to be over the course of many days, or clothes are changing. That's like really something I experienced a lot as a young person. It kind of dates me a little bit, that having a sedentary phone in the house that you have to wait by, hoping your crush will call, or talking to your friends for hours and hours on end. What else? Shout out to very specific Starbucks in Cook Street Village, where I grew up. Okay, I've got a question here. So this says, do you draw in the wild, bring sketchbooks with you, or save it for home? If in the wild, any tips for not losing your books out there? Like not losing your sketchbooks if you're drawing outside? Well, I bring sketchbooks with me in my, I find one that's small enough to put in my purse or like tote bag or something, which I find is helpful. I like using a Pentel pocket brush pen. I use it a lot, and it's nice if you're drawing on the bus or out in the wild, because it's still kind of got a brush texture, but you don't have to bring a pot of ink with you. I should do more drawing from life. I like drawing from life. I find that like I almost always have a sketchbook with me, but it's like half full or more than half full of like writing and grocery lists. I do a lot of writing. I think that my work, I think I'm more of like a verbal person than a visual person, which is like funny because I'm more of a visual artist, but I really think in words first. So a lot of my ideas come out of writing before drawing. got this question. Did you draw this book with a Sharpie? What other pens materials for the interior pages? I drew a lot of it with a brush pen. There's parts of it that there's like one little section I drew with a nib. I don't use Sharpies. Sharpies are not archival. So this is like, there's like a little nib panel with these witches. Sharpies aren't archival. So if they're exposed to light, the ink will fade and eventually disappear. So I don't draw with them for anything that I'm interested in like saving long term. I think that for the cover, this stuff, if this fades and goes away, it's kind of okay. It's the cover itself is the artwork. The book is the artwork, not the original. But for my original pages, I want to keep them archival. My first book, which is called Hot or Not, 20th Century Male Artists, I drew in a sketchbook, and that was fun. But then a few years later, someone wanted to show some of the pages, and I was like, in a gallery, and it's like, well, they're double-sided and in a sketchbook, so it's not really possible. So I recommend using like Bristol if you can. I use just like a regular HB pencil and ruler, and sometimes microns. I did the lettering with a Faber-Castell brush tip pen. Oh, I have one right here, which was because I wanted the lettering to be thick and kind of commensurate with the line weight of the drawing. This pen is a little crazy to use. Erin, my partner, says it feels like the pen is dying as soon as you take the lid off of it. So, but it worked for me. Okay, I've got some more questions. It makes sure to scroll up to Laura's question. Okay, here we go. Laura says, do you see and draw in terms of shapes, thinking of the heavy black ink parts in your panels and the collage nature of your carpet works? Yeah, that's really interesting. I love Love and Rockets, the comic series, the Hernandez brothers comic series, Love and Rockets. And one of the things about, I think both Gilbert and Jaime, but especially Jaime, is that he'll have like 50% of the page will be black, super graphic, and I'm really drawn to that. And that's something that happens a lot in my work too. I think that the patterning and shapes and like a hyper graphic quality seeps in often. I definitely, a lot of cartoonists talk about this, but I think about comics in terms of being a combination of poetry and graphic design. And so I'm certainly thinking about like the page as a design element and moving your eye around. I also think that personally, I find reading comics in black and white is a lot easier, and than reading color comics, though I like those as well. And so I debated making this book in color at some point, but I just realized I was already making it really like black and white and graphic and kind of thinking about it in terms of shapes. Also, like I've started signing books. This is my sister, Taylor. So I've started signing books with collage, where I just like make little collages and then try to turn them into a drawing. And that's been really fun for me. I think having something to react to is really useful. And especially during COVID, where I've become like so miserable and anxious, working in a more intuitive way, I found is a lot easier than sitting down and looking at a blank piece of paper. All right, I've got some more questions in here. Your cross-hatching style is so unique. How did you develop it? Well, I mean, I think that again, I do have this kind of like graphic inclination, looking at people like the Hernandez brothers. Also, because I'm working in black and white, when I use cross-hatching, I'm trying to think about like how to build up tone, but using just black and white, and I'm drawing with like a brush or a brush pen often, so I have these really thick lines. There's especially moments where like, so okay, I'm gonna find a scene here that's got a lot of cross-hatching. Oh yeah, so I don't know if this isn't quite cross-hatching, but like there's this scene where she's like, you know, laying on the couch all day. This is Lauren watching television, falling asleep, miserable, which is like, I've definitely done a lot in my life. And I just wanted to think about how can I show that, you know, the sun is setting, lights disappearing. And I do that by building up tonality and lines. But yeah, do you write a script or do you start with thumbnails? I kind of talked about that, but for this book, I wrote a script. I started by writing point form notes, like here's what's going to happen. I know I want this eyebrow plucking scene. I know I want all these specific scenes. I know I have this general arc. And then I went through and filled it in chapter by chapter, first with prose, kind of explaining what would happen. And then I went in and wrote the dialogue. And then from there, I moved into thumbnailing and edited it again, and then penciled and inked a final page. Will there be a hot or not sequel? Your constituents are clamoring. This is a question. Hot or not is my first book that I did. It's about where I guessed whether male artists of the 20th century were hot or not based on their artwork. And I teach art history. And yesterday I was watching little minimalism documentary with my students. And I was like, oh, some of these people have, one of the rules I had in making that book was that everyone had to be dead who I was writing about. I didn't want to write about people who were living. And I realized like, oh, some of these people have died since I made that book. So maybe I could make a sequel. Yeah, maybe one day, hot or not sequel. Okay, that's the last of the questions. I went through them too quickly. So I think that sort of is the end of the questions that I have here. I'll put it to the room. Oh, we've got another one. Do you learn any helpful tips for drawing with good posture without pain? Think of your comments sitting 14 hours at the desk. Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a really great book by Creata Wilberg that, now I'm just gonna look it up really quick. I have the blanking on the title. This artist, Draw Stronger, Self-Care for Cartoonists and Visual Artists. Creata Wilberg is an artist and a dancer, and she's married to Bob Sikoriak, who's a great cartoonist. And she wrote this book that's full of tips for posture and stretches and ways to prevent repetitive stress injury. So I really recommend that book. I think in terms of I need to be better. I need to get a better chair and not be hunched over a desk all day. I think having a drafting table really helps a lot. Personally, I find my wrists, because I draw with a brush often or like a brush pen, I don't put as much pressure on my wrists as other cartoonists I know who draw just with like microns or something. And so if you can do that, if you can use like a brush pen, or if you can like vary your movements, I think that's really can be super helpful in preventing injury. But really, Draw Stronger by Creata Wilberg. I 100% recommend that book, and practicing the exercises in there, definitely. I don't know what else there is to, there's no more questions over here. Okay. So there is going to be, this is the book release day. I really encourage you, if you're able, to go pick up the book at your local indie bookstore. Additionally, I am going to be doing like an official book launch event on May 5th, which you can get, it'll be on Zoom. You can get the information from Drawn and Quarterly, and that'll be a little bit more formal. There'll be a slideshow, and I'll talk a little bit more about the book, and I'll be in conversation with someone. So if you're curious, if you have more questions that I'm not addressing right now, I would be very happy to see all of your faces and names at that event. Also, if you're in Wisconsin anytime in the next year, and you want to sit in a lazy boy, please check out the show in the adjacent Possible the Kohler Art Center. Someone asks, what music should I listen to when I'm reading this book? Shouldn't you be reading in silence, Laura? Laura Park asks this. You should be reading it in silence so you can fully concentrate, Laura. I don't know. I don't really listen to music when I'm reading, usually. And Joe Ullman says, more of a comment than a question. Rave is a great book. You heard it here first, folks, from Joe Ullman. It's a great book. Best read in silence. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate this. It's so funny talking into the void, but I like seeing some familiar names pop up in the chat. And I miss all of you, and I hope we can all be together in real space at some point. Um, please get the book. We're gonna wrap up. We're gonna just wrap it up right now. And thank you all so much. All right. Still here for a minute, so.